loud, so I just brought it here. I hope that's all right. Hello there, and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing parlor, where today I'll be going over how to make the basic block skirt patterns. And technically this is the final component of the standard basic block set, where you have a bodice, sleeve, and skirt pattern. Trousers are a thing, but they're not usually actually considered part of the basic block set. You can't have a block for trousers, which is something we will cover later on in this series. And this is another component of the foundation pattern set that I usually just draft using standardized instructions from pattern drafting manuals like the Helen Joseph Armstrong book that you see me use here all the time. And I have indeed used the Armstrong text instructions to do this once before here on the channel, so I can put a card up to that if you might find that video more illuminating than this one. I will be starting with another blank sheet of paper today and going through all of the steps to create these skirt blocks to match up with the patterns that I've been working on earlier in this series. And while the basic skirt block patterns can be used immediately to make pencil skirts, and you've seen me do that here on the channel several times before, maybe hundreds of times at this point. Being the basic skirt blocks, this is actually the foundation that we use to make all other skirt styles, or most other skirt styles. A lot of just gathered skirts or pleated skirts are just a rectangle, so you don't really even need a pattern so much as you just need to decide how deep you want your pleats to be or how much gathering you desire. And I'll be covering several different skirt styles made with the same foundation pattern in a future video. Luckily, as I've said, I do find these skirts to be the simplest portion of the foundation pattern set to put together, so let's go ahead and dive on in.
And I began, of course, with a sheet of alphanumeric paper, a measuring tape, some scissors, my markers, etc. But the last thing I will need are my actual measurements. And that's right, today I'm going to be using my actual measurements, though I will still be referring to the chart in the Helen Joseph Armstrong book. I will be linking to the pages you might need to reference from this book to follow along in the description below over on Pinterest, where I have found them floating around completely innocently. And, you know, they're not brand new scans or anything like that, so don't worry. But you will be able to find all of the recipe information I referenced today linked in the description below. But while I am a big fan of using the standardized measurements for drafting the bodice blocks, due to just how many measurements are needed and the inability for you to take those measurements completely accurately on your own, for example, I do think that it is possible, because there are fewer measurements needed, to draft the skirt patterns from your own measurements. I have taken mine and listed them on this little scrap piece of paper. You're not going to really be able to see what those are, but more you need the name of the measurement you'll be using, less the actual measurement that corresponds to my personal body, because of course that's not relevant to anyone but me. And I will make a list in the description below of the exact measurements you will need for this draft, so you can get all of those in order on your own reference sheet first. And I'm going to start by drawing a straight line down the center-ish of my piece of paper here. This will be the side seam in the end, and I'm going to mark the top of this line A, and then to find B here along this line, you're just going to choose a skirt length. Now, I like having my pencil skirts quite long, usually around 29 inches for the base pattern, but for this draft, I'm going to start with 22 inches long, and then I will add on length once we are finished, just so I can keep everything in frame here on the camera, because, of course, the camera only zooms out so far above the table here. So our first line here, point A to point B, is just going to be the skirt length you desire. Then using our center front hip depth measurement, this is measurement number 25 on the charts for those keeping score, we will use that measurement to mark down from A to a new point, point C. And then to start creating our waistline here, we are going to just square off along A at the top of our pattern here, and then mark out from A towards the left. We're going to mark point D, and A to D is going to be our back hip arc measurement, measurement number 23, plus a ½ inch of ease. We will then also square out from C, which is actually the kind of hip level line on this pattern. We're going to come down the same exact distance and mark that, and that will be point E eventually along that hip line. But I'll measure down to the bottom of my skirt, at least for now as well, and this will be point F down here. And again, this is all just squared off from that measurement back hip arc that is along the top waistline here, which is the back hip arc plus a ½ inch. And I'll just label these E and F here. This left-hand side will eventually be the back of the skirt pattern. I'm going to go ahead and measure up from E to mark a new point along this line. So marking up from E, I want the center back hip depth measurement, which is again measurement number 25. Should be a little bit down from D up here, just a tiny bit, just because of the curve of most backs. Again, if yours does not correspond to this exactly, that's fine. Now to begin working on the front of our skirt pattern here on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm going to measure out from A along our top waistline to find point H. And we'll be using the front hip arc measurement plus a ½ inch. That is measurement number 23 again on the charts. Once again, you're going to square down from this line to create the center front of the skirt and label the cross point midway I at the hip level and then J down at the hem. So you can see so far all we've done is create 4 rectangles, sort of the old Windows logo if you're a 90s kid like me. And I promise this is far less intimidating than, say, the bodice pattern, so if you've tried that before, the skirts are much easier, and you really should give it a try. I am going to go ahead and zoom us in here in a moment because we are about to start creating the darts up at the waist and shaping that. But in order to keep this a little bit cleaner and keep everything in frame again, I will go ahead and cut away my excess paper for now, just so that we can see what is going on. Now we're going to go ahead and dial in the back waistline here and create the hip curve along the center of this pattern where we started with point A. So we're going to measure in from D towards the center to find mark K. We're going to use the back waist arc measurement, that's measurement 19, plus a 1/4 inch of ease, and also add on our dart intake. Again, use the dart intake from the dart chart that again is linked below. So because I have a 13-inch difference between my waist and hip measurements, I will be using a dart intake of 1 1/4 inches for each of these back darts. So I will add on that 2.5 inches and 1/4 inch to my measurement, and I will find point K here along the waistline. And like so much of this process, the dart intake and also the dart placement measurements are very much guidelines rather than rules, and you may need more or less. That is something we can play with once we get to fitting the skirt later on. And I need to find my dart placement here, so I'm going to measure in from D and mark point L. And I'm going to use 3.5 inches for my dart placement today. This is again something that may need to move for your own personal body shape, and you will discover that later in the mock-up stage. You can find the dart placement listed on the standardized measurement charts, or you can actually just measure your bodice pattern if that's something you've already done. Measure from the center front to the first dart leg on your bodice pattern and use that as a guideline for creating your skirt pattern. And then at least you're starting from a place where they already match up when you go to fix and fit your pattern later. I'm going to measure out from that new point L, the 1 1/4 inch that I'm using for my dart intake back here. And then they ask for 1 1/2 inches between the 2 darts, so I'll go ahead and mark that as well. The instructions in the book actually says 1 1/4 inches apart, and then the picture right below that sentence shows 1 1/2 inches. I just use 1.5. And at this point, we are beginning to just copy edit this book together. So 1.5 inches and then another 1 1/4 for the second dart here. And then it just asks you to square off a line from K along the waist here, so I'll do that as well. 90-degree angle, basically from the original waistline that we drew earlier. Now to find point M, which is going to be our front waist measurement, I need to take the front waist arc, which is measurement number 19, again, plus a 1/4 inch and the front dart intake onto that measurement as well. And I had forgotten to measure this one, so I just did it real quick here. Again, for my 13-inch difference, the dart intake chart suggests 5/8 of an inch intake for each of the front darts, so I'll be using that 5/8 of an inch, 1 1/4 inches total added onto my measurement. And of course, I'm going to do my very simple back of the napkin math out loud because my brain just doesn't work that way. I'm so sorry. So I'll measure from H over to M with that little bit of ease and dart intake included in my front waist arc. This is mostly measuring and not a ton of math, thankfully, especially for those who use decimals instead of fractions, because of course I work in fractions thanks to being raised in the United States. Some pros, many cons. I will then use the dart placement of 3.5 inches once again to mark in from H, where my first dart needs to be. That will be 5/8 of an inch. Again, I will put 1.5 inches between the 2 darts and mark the second one again 5/8 of an inch after that. And then square up and down from M once again, so we can use this as a reference to draw in the hip curve in a moment. And something I do want to note is that if your measurements are not listed on the standardized chart in the Armstrong text that I'll be linking below, and folks' measurements will not be because this chart covers like fashion industry standards, which are of course on the littler end, it is just jumping up a ratio each time. So once you find that ratio for each measurement, you can use math to create like the other half of the chart if you want to. You can size up just going off these ratios. And if anyone wants a fun Excel project and is that kind of math brain spreadsheety person, feel free to fill in the rest of the chart for us. DM me about it and then I will share that resource with everyone. Now I have gone ahead and grabbed my hip curve ruler. I forgot to include this in the list of supplies you may want or need. This is the only time I will be using it though, so it does seem a silly expense to add on if you're only going to be using the ruler once. You can draw a curve like this with the assistance of your French curve perhaps, or just by eye. And this is a curve we will be refining in the muslin later anyhow, so if it's not perfect, don't worry about it. But essentially what you do here is you line the ruler up, and you're not looking at the numbers along the ruler as much as you're just using the inch indications on this to measure up the side hip depth, that is measurement number 26 on the chart, up along from C, where it crosses through the line, and mark that new point. P for the back and Q for the front. I luckily just still have my hip curve ruler kicking around from, again, my freshman year design kit back in fashion school, and I really only ever use it when making skirt patterns like this, so once every 6 years or so maybe, not often. You may also be able to find a printable hip curve ruler on the internet. I'll try and see if I can find one, and if I can, I'll link it in the description below. And once I have found P and Q, once I've minded P and Q here, I do just need to connect from point G up to P to find my back waistline, and do the same sort of thing for the front here between H and Q. And I am using the shallow side of the hip curve ruler as suggested by Armstrong in the text. Now the Armstrong text does have standardized lengths for both the front and back darts. Again, these will be adjusted once we try on the muslin in a moment. But for these darts, we're going to first find the center of each dart. So here on the back, it's 1 1/4 inches. So I'll find the center of that for both of those, mark that for myself square down, and then I'll do the same for the front for the 5/8 of an inch darts. Again, find the center of that and square down. Then I will go ahead and mark the length for these darts, and Armstrong suggests 5 1/2 inches for the back darts, like so. I need to mark down from the actual waistline, please, thank you. 5 1/2, and then I can connect my dart legs up to the waistline here, like so, for both darts. Again, these might need to be longer or shorter, or smaller or larger. We don't know yet. This is all just guidelines. This is so we don't have to take a blank piece of fabric over to the body and have to drape this from scratch. Although that is, again, something you can do. You just have to make sure you're keeping your grain lines in mind when doing that, just like we did when I was working on the bodice earlier in this series. And then according to Armstrong, we need to make the front darts 3 1/2 inches long. But once the darts are drawn in, you have basically created your skirt pattern. The far right-hand side is now the center front, and the back line on the left here is the center back. I will need to cut this out and, of course, add seam allowance before I go ahead and try and create a muslin out of this. And before I do so, I will go ahead and lengthen the skirt at last, because I know that I like my pencil skirts longer. You can make these quite short if you want to. You can even just keep your block pattern short just to conserve on paper if you want, and then make the hem a different length every time. And you have seen me before narrow pencil skirts by bringing in the side seams a little bit. Just make sure you do that. You don't start tapering above point I here, that hip level, because you need that to still fit your hips. But we're not going to do anything fancy like narrowing the skirt just yet, because we have to make sure this fits onto the body. And I will go ahead and cut this out and add seam allowance along the side seam down the center here. And I will go ahead and just do that for the waist before I cut this apart, because it would be silly not to. Add my 1/2 inch on here. I feel like there's way too much going on outside once again. No one can hear it, but I know it's there. I can see it ticking up on the microphone. They're actually painting the house across the street from me. And it's a very cute house, so I was relieved to see that they're painting it the exact same colors. They're just repainting it. And if they want to come over to my place and take the aluminum siding off from the 70s, take off the horrible storm windows, and then paint my house as well, I can't pay them, but they can feel free. Yes, that's right, I do have horrible aluminum siding on the outside of my house. It was cute once. I have a picture of what it used to look like. Maybe the wood siding is still underneath the aluminum, maybe it's not. Maybe it's rotten, maybe it's not. I tell you what, I won't know for several years, because I'm not going to look under there until I can afford to have it fixed, which is not now. Curb appeal, sadly, will be last. But I've added my seam allowance on the side seams here. Again, the center front and the center back can be placed on folds, depending on where you want to set a zipper in. I am actually going to use a 9-inch skirt zipper and set that into the center back of my skirt muslin today, just so that I can have a real idea of how this is going to fit on my body later on. I will have all my seam allowance and darts on the outside of the skirt, however, so that I can make adjustments. Once I get to wearing this later on, I will use my awl to poke holes in the pattern so I can transfer my dart indications down onto the muslin below. And I have left myself 1 inch of seam allowance along the center back, as you can see. But I will go ahead and mark all of my darts, pinch and pin those, and bring them over to the machine. In addition to showing this drafting process in a video once before here on the channel, that again will be linked in a card, I do have a video all about how I would sew a pencil skirt using this pattern, so I will go ahead and put a card up to that video as well. And speaking of renovations around here, I am hoping to get a little bit of work done in the upcoming week, so I will have a small update hopefully coming for you about one of the next rooms I want to start working on in the house real soon here. But more importantly, I need any of you who are familiar with upstate New York or the Northeast in general to tell me your best fall spots that I need to visit. Great pumpkin patches, cute towns in Vermont. Tell me where I need to go this fall when it's extra orange outside, because I need to start planning my fall now that the weather is cooling down here, and I can pull out my scarves, pull out my jackets, the wool suiting, and really thrive, because we all know fall is the best of seasons. And actually, my brother will be coming to visit me later this month, but I don't think he's as enthused about fall and Halloween as I am, so I might have to save the fall activities just for me. I'm not sure if he wants to go to a pumpkin patch. I might force him to anyway. We'll see. Over here on the 99K, I will go ahead and start at the large end of the dart and sew off the tip as usual. Then I will just tie a knot with the threads at the tip of the dart, snip off the excess, and then keep going, sewing each dart with this same process as I always do here on the channel. Again, this is just one of the methods I was taught back in fashion school, and it's the one I have stuck with. It's never given me any trouble. I am using all-purpose Gutermann thread over here on the machine. I think this is a size 12 microtex needle, although I doubt it's super sharp anymore because it's been in here for a couple of projects. Probably needs to be switched out. That is one of the secret cheat codes to having a smooth sewing experience that I feel gets left out far too often. Change your needles for like every project. Consider them weirdly disposable. The universe is just going to give you less issues with a fresh needle. And I think it's better just to have the slight extra expense of having fresh needles on hand than have to deal with any frustration when it comes to tension or the thread doing something weird in the future. I am going to then press all my darts. I'm going to press the darts on the front and the back both towards the center front and the center back. You can press your darts towards the side seam if that is your preference. I again just learned to press darts towards the center, and that is what I do. I always press darts towards the center or down, depending on where the darts are, of course, on my project. Here are my back darts as well. Just using my tailor's ham to help me out with that. Like so, and my muslin is re-crinkling all over. This muslin is from moodfabrics.com, and I do find that it's a bit starched, which I really quite like, especially for interlining things, because it gives a bit of structure, or at least temporary structure. Not sure how long it lasts. Probably reactivated if I were to steam it, which is always nice. I'm not sure if there actually is starch in this, by the way. That's just a feeling I have. It's unbleached muslin, which is one of the best smells. If any of you ever worked in like a costuming workroom or a tailoring shop, one of the best smells is when you're ironing unbleached muslin. Cotton has such a nice, almost like sweet shop smell. It's weirdly sugary. I do think that there needs to be a muslin scent candle. All those like fresh cotton, fresh laundry candles do not capture the smell of muslin, which is far better than any laundry candle I've ever smelled. So someone needs to capture this scent. Let me know if you've ever smelled a good cotton muslin candle out there. It's such a warm, sweet smell. It'd be perfect for fall, honestly. But I used my 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew the side seams, and now for the center back, I will go ahead and sew from where the zipper will end down to where the start of the slit will begin. Basically, you want to make sure that your slit doesn't come up higher than, like below your bum. How much of a slit do you want in your skirt? It's up to you. This skirt is a straight skirt from the hip down right now, so it's not like it's super narrowed or anything. I don't need a major walkability addition to the back of this, but it is something to keep in mind. And once I have pressed that back inch of seam allowance open, I can go ahead and set in my zipper. I am just going to use my regular lapped zipper methodology for this, and I do have a video covering how I set in lapped zippers here on the channel as well, so I will go ahead and use my third card to link you over to that. And here I am wearing my muslin mock-up of that skirt pattern we just created, and I'm noticing, wow, that 1/2 inch of ease she has you add along both the front and the back results in having about an inch of ease to pinch out along the side seams, funny enough. So I personally don't love a ton of extra ease. You do need a tiny bit in order to be able to sit in something like this, but honestly, this skirt pattern drafted from my current measurements is larger than the one I use normally, and I'm still able to sit in everything I've made lately, so I think you can get away with keeping these things quite taut, honestly, but it again is a matter of preference. We're talking about fit number 2 here, while I should be refining fit number 1. But I'm just going to pinch out all of the excess that I don't need and try and make sure I'm keeping my side seam where I want it to be. The back darts, once I have the side seams pinched away, the back darts seem to be fitting well along the back here, so I'm not worried about those. But in the front, I do have this little bit of puckering or like pillowing below the darts. I think these darts could be a little longer, seeing as they're only 3.5 inches long or whatever. Not long enough. So I'm just going to try and go ahead and pinch away the extra little bit of fabric below these. It's only, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch here. I'm just going to pinch that out and see where this actually needs to end for my own personal shape. Again, this is up to you. You could have the darts shorter like this and just keep things a little bit blousier in the front if you want to. That is definitely a fit choice you can make, and again, will be useful if you plan to sit often in these sorts of things. When I'm wearing a pencil skirt, I do tend to be standing more than sitting. Usually at the antique mall or the museum. Those are the 2 places you can actually find me in the wild, really. I will go ahead and transfer those adjustments that I marked onto the muslin onto my paper pattern. Just going to extend the length of these darts, which will help eliminate that excess I do not want. Then I'm just going to transfer over what I wanted to take off this side as well. I will use my hip curve again, just to help me make sure this is a smooth line. And I'll cut off the excess from along the side seam. tape down my floops before they get out of hand, get caught on anything and torn. Wouldn't want that. I will set the front aside and again make a similar modification to the back. The darts were fine, but I still need to take the excess off the side here, so I'm referencing what I pinned on the muslin. And I will go ahead and make that modification along the side here. I'm taking a good inch off of this pattern. There is, of course, seam allowance sitting on this pattern. Much to everyone's chagrin, listen, I work with seam allowance at all times. You may work in a different way, and that's fine. We can all make clothes in our own way, all right? Like a big happy kumbaya, my love. Don't be combative. You know what I mean. All right, I'm actually going to reference my usual skirt patterns to see how close we got here. And this one is actually, looks like it matches up perfectly, but that's because my skirt pattern has an inch of seam allowance that this does not have. So actually, the pattern I've been working on today is a little bit larger than the skirt pattern that I use all the time, as I mentioned there, while I had the muslin on. But of course, this is supposed to match up with my body as it is today, which is not when I made that card pattern. That's from 10 years ago. And again, is probably a little bit small on me, but I like negative ease, so that doesn't bother me. And this is supposed to match up with the new block patterns we've been working on. So this needs to match up to this. So what I need to do here is make sure that this will match up. And as we can see, the skirt is indeed too big. So I'm being too generous with myself. I need to take more ease off of this skirt. The waistline of the bodice is much smaller here. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that and realign these things and take the excess off of the skirt that I need to. I will take some of that off from the center here, which helps me align my dart legs as well between the bodice and the skirt patterns. So I'm going to move the center back inwards about 5/8 of an inch. I will just leave this on the pattern as seam allowance, but I just make sure I mark the new center back line. I do suggest actually folding your darts closed here in the paper to help match these things up, which is what I will do here on the front. Just again making sure I have the waistline of the bodice pattern and the waistline of the skirt as the same measurement so they can be sewn together later. And the next step in this process, after you fix up your skirt pattern here, is of course to either modify or cut out a new skirt muslin and sew it into the bodice muslins that you've been working on previously. And again, you don't have to use muslin fabric. That is just what I call mock-ups. I often call them muslins. Sometimes people call them calicos. It's what it's created out of, the mock-up is made out of. But of course you can make your mock-up out of whatever you wish. I just recommend a light to low medium weight plain woven cotton or linen, honestly. You don't want anything too loosely woven that will stretch out of shape while you're trying to fit your pattern, that's for sure. But like a poplin, a broadcloth would be fine. And again, I'm going to remove the excess from the center front, which helps me create a smaller skirt to match up with my bodice pattern, which is actually more in line with the patterns I use all the time, so I do think this would work were I to sew it together. However, I'm not personally going to be wasting the muslin this time. Please forgive me, your girl is on a budget and I need to save the rest for interlining future projects.
I do hope this updated video version of how I draft my basic block skirt patterns was helpful for some of you today. I know this is a more straightforward pattern drafting by the book tutorial. It varies how hard something is, how creative I get to put it together. So because this has always worked for me, this is what I have stuck to, but you may find another method works better for you. In any case, thank you as always for watching today, and thank you to my patrons who make my work and these videos possible. And as always, I'll be back here drafting dangerously with you real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye. Don't eat the microphone. You're gonna lick that, aren't you? He licks everything, honestly. No, my love. Can you sit here with me? I know you're not used to being up here, but you just need to sit. Just sit. See, Sophie is just sitting. Just sit, Lupin. Tim Tams.